Loops. Let's talk about loops in Java. Loops are used for program control, and they're also used for calculations. So I want to step you through the three main types of loops. So let's start off here, and I want to initialize a variable here, a counter. Okay, and we're going to start this counter at 0. And basically, the counter basically is going to be our mechanism to get us out of the loop. Okay. Now, our first loop I want to talk about is a do loop. Okay, so it starts off with a do. That's a reserved word here, do, followed by a brace. And then we have a condition statement down here. We have a while. It's followed by a while. Okay, so it's always going to have loop or do, brace, while, and then we have our condition statement. So the thing about a do loop, it will always run once. Okay, so if we're working our way down through the code, okay, well, here we have a system out, but we can have as many lines of code as we need. We increment our counter. Okay, our counter was at 0. It's going to go to 1. Hits the brace. We check the while statement. So we have the while. Okay, is 0 less than 20,000? Yes, it is. We come up again, hit our brace, run our code. It gets incremented. Now it's 1. Is 1 less than 20,000? And we do this until we reach 20,000, because eventually the counter will get to 20,000. Is 20,000 less than 20,000? No, it's not. That goes false. It kicks us out of the loop. One thing I want to point out to you here with the do loop, look here. It ends with a semicolon right there. So you want to watch that there on a do loop. Let's move down to our next type of loop. So our next type of loop that we're going to look at is a while loop. So a while loop, we will check the conditions before we make it run. Now, since I'm using the same counter, and you'll see this typically in programs where we'll use the same counter over again, we'll need to reinitialize that back to 0. So we come into our while. It starts off with a while. We have our condition statement. So we have here is 0 less than 20,000. That's true. So then we'll go into our braces. We can run our lines of code. Once again, we have as many lines of code as we need. We're going to increment our counter right here. Hit the brace. The brace takes us back up here. So our counter went from 0 to 1. Is 1 less than 20,000? Yes, it is. Run our code. Goes to 2. Is 2 less than 20,000? Yes, it is. Run our code. And we'll do this until, once again, it gets to 20,000. Then we'll say, is 20,000 less than 20,000? No, it's not. Kicks us out because it went to false. Notice there's no semicolon here, but there was in the previous. There's a semicolon here, but not here. Okay, so a while loop will always check the condition statement first before it runs. Let's move down and look at the next loop, and this next loop is called a for loop, and it looks like this. Starts off with the word for. Okay, now what's cool about a for loop in here is we actually create and initialize our counter within the for statement itself. So here we are, we've got a counter going on here. We've got counter 2, it's an int, initializing it to 0. It's followed by a semicolon. And then we're going to actually have our condition statement here, followed by a semicolon. And then we have our incrementer. And then we followed by our braces. So within the parentheses, we have everything happening within our parentheses in one line of code. And that's sort of cool on that. Once again, we can have as many lines of code as we need. It runs down, it hits the brace. So when it hits the brace, it comes back to the for. This then automatically increments our counter. So now we're at 1. Is 1 less than 200? Yes, it is. Run a code, hits the brace, incrementer goes up to 3. And we do this until the counter eventually gets to 200. Is 200 less than 200? No, it's not. That becomes false. It kicks us out of the loop. Okay, so we have those three loops up there, the do, the while, and the for. One thing I want to point out to you here with the incrementers. Okay, so we have here counter plus plus. Okay, and that will increment by 1. But if we go counter minus minus, That will take us down by 1. Notice there are no spaces between the plus plus or the minus minus. The longhand version of doing this very same thing here for the incrementers is we can write this out longhand, meaning we can write it as counter equals counter plus 1. Okay, and what's cool about that is if we need to change our incrementing, so maybe we want to count by fives, so that would basically look like this: counter equals counter plus 5. Okay, if we needed to make this go down by 5, we could go minus 5 or minus 1 or minus 10 plus 20, okay, by just manipulating that number here. So we have the 3 major loops on there. We have the do, which will always run once. We have the while statement that will check the condition statement before it runs. And then we have the for, which will always run. And it's basically used if we know what the boundaries are.